The water on the warehouse floor was not hers this time. For a moment, crouched on one knee between leaking barrels and a drain clogged with straw, Serin almost felt lucky. Rainwater ran in silver threads over the warped planks, carrying sawdust, ash, fish scales, and the black grit that blew in from the upper kills. It pooled around her bare toes, cold enough to sting. The sting helped. It kept her mind from drifting toward the other thing she could feel in the room. Tension. It hummed through the ropes coiled beside the casks. It throbbed in the iron hoops around the barrels. It whispered in the beams overhead, swollen with damp, each fiber swollen and complaining in its own voice. To anyone else it was a warehouse in a cliffside village at the end of a hard season, wet, rank, crowded, smelling of salt, old wood, lamp oil, and fermented grain. To Serin, it was an orchestra so badly tuned it hurt her teeth. "Don't do that with your throat," her sister said. The voice came from the office platform at the back, where the ledgers were kept under oilcloth. Maevra did not raise her voice often. She did not need to. She had the kind of control that made shouting seem wasteful, vulgar, beneath her. Even now, seated with one long leg crossed over the other, her polished boots dry while the rest of the warehouse sweated under the rain, she sounded merely annoyed. Serin touched her throat at once. "I didn't," she said. Maevra's eyes lifted from the ledger. They were gold like old coins, bright against blue skin several shades darker than Serin's. Their horns were different too. Serin's curved back in a clean black crescent from her temples. Maevra's were thicker, ridged, asymmetrical at the tips where one had broken years ago and grown back wrong, lending her a permanent air of having already survived whatever she might do to you. "Your throat moved," Maevra said. "So either you made the sound, or your body has developed opinions without consulting me. Which would be rude." The clerk near the doorway kept his head down and wrote harder than necessary. Outside, beyond the lifted loading doors, rain sheeted over the stone lane in slanted silver bars. A cartwheel rattled past. Someone cursed at a mule. The whole village of Ilyr's reach seemed built on vertical surfaces and grudges. Stairs instead of streets. Bridges instead of alleys. Timber houses bolted to the cliff face, their windows lit amber against the blue storm dark. Ropes everywhere. Chains. Pulley rigs creaking over the lower drops. Smoke from the smelter terraces getting flattened by the weather and pressed back down over everything like a dirty lid. Serin knew every note of it. She also knew exactly how long she had to answer before Maevra rose. "I'm sorry," Serin said. "Are you?" "No." "Yes. It depends what counts." The truth sat inside her like a hidden animal, breathing. She had always felt the world through vibration first and meaning second. Before she understood words, she had known whether the floorboards beneath her mother's bed would complain if she stepped there. Before she knew how weather worked, she could hear rain approaching in the iron hook set into the walls. Before she understood lies, she could hear them in the change in a person's breath, the faint tightening of ribs and tongue before falsehood crossed teeth. And before she was 10, Maevra had learned that Serin was useful. "Come here," her sister said. Serin stood. Water dripped from the hem of her work skirt. She had been rolling casks all morning, and her shoulders ached from it. Her palms were raw. She crossed the warehouse carefully, hearing every board underfoot, each one a small complaint or warning. The last time she had misjudged a weak plank, Maevra had called it clumsiness and whipped her with a wet rope in front of the dockhands so she would remember that mistakes were expensive. Maevra set down the pen. "Tell me which one." Serin's stomach tightened. On the office platform lay 4 cargo seals and a narrow iron probe used to test cask hoops for stress. Maevra had arranged them in a neat line. Not a ledger task, then. A test. "The southern shipment?" Serin asked. "The merchant from Vaycross says 1 cask burst before arrival," Maevra said. "Claims the cooperage was faulty. I say his men stacked it badly. You say which of us is right. Maevra never said please when she wanted Seran's gift. She said useful things should be used. Serin took the probe. Her fingers closed around the cold iron, and the world sharpened. She moved to the row of wine casks nearest the door. Rain boomed on the roof. Somewhere above, a chain harness groaned as a loading platform shifted in the wind. One cask after another, she touched hoop, stave, seam. Most gave back the ordinary layered song of wood under pressure, iron holding where it should, liquid inside sloshing with dull obedience. The third cask from the end made her flinch. There, she said. Maevra did not move. Why? The lower hoop was set when the wood was still too warm. It shrank unevenly after. There's a weak place where the grain twisted near the bung. It didn't burst from stacking. It was already waiting. The clerk's quill paused. Maevra's expression barely changed, but Serin saw the satisfaction move through her anyway, subtle as a snake under cloth. Not because Serin had been right. Because being right meant Serin could be useful in front of witnesses. Maevra rose and descended from the platform with the smooth balance of a dancer or a duelist. She wore dark fitted leather, rain mantle thrown back, whip coiled at her hip not as ornament but as punctuation. People moved around Maevra. Even still objects seemed to make room. She ran the probe along the hoop, then handed it to the clerk. Write it down. Fault in coopering, not transit. Discount them a quarter and make them grateful I'm not demanding half. The clerk nodded. Maevra turned to Serin. You see. This is why I keep you close. She reached and wiped a streak of grime from Serin's cheek with her thumb. To someone passing by, it might have looked almost tender. Serin held perfectly still. Maevra's thumb came away black with soot and rain grit. She smiled without warmth. Try not to look frightened when I praise you, she murmured. It confuses people. Then, more loudly, back to work. Serin obeyed. She always obeyed in public. In public, Maevra was the elder sister who had kept the family business alive after their mother drowned on a winter crossing and their father drank himself into an early grave. She was the one who paid the tariffs, soothed the guild, managed the laborers, faced down thieves. People admired competence. They forgave brutality if it was tidy. Only in private did the balance shift enough for the truth to show its teeth. By dusk the rain had worsened. Water poured off the upper roofs and hammered the gutters so hard the whole lane sounded like a river confined by stubborn masonry. The dockhands had gone. The clerk had gone. The mules were under cover. Lanternlight turned the wet boards honey-colored and made every puddle look deeper than it was. Serin was tying down a stack of packing crates when she felt Maevra behind her. Not heard. Felt. There was a specific silence Maevra carried when she was angry and trying to decide what shape to give it. You were humming again, Maevra said. Serin's hands froze on the rope. No. I was upstairs balancing accounts and I could feel it through the floor. I wasn't doing it on purpose. That has never once improved the situation. The first lash did not fall. Maevra was too disciplined for that. First she circled, studying Serin the way she studied invoices, weak points, spoiled stock. Rain rattled the shutters. A draft moved through the building, cool and briny, flickering the lantern flames. When Lord Enver came last month, Maevra said, what did he ask about you? Serin stared at the knot in the rope. Nothing. Maevra caught her jaw and turned her face. Not hard, not yet. You're a poor liar, she said softly. He asked whether the stories were true. Whether my little sister could hear a crack before it happened. Whether she could test bridge cables. Whether she could inspect ore carts in the tunnels. Whether she could make him rich by stopping disaster before it struck. There it was. The real bruise beneath the skin. He wanted to hire you, Maevra said. Out from under me. Serin swallowed. And what did I tell him? That I was sick. That you are delicate. Unwell. Touched in the head from fever as a child. That you hear things because your mind doesn't fit properly. I protected you. The grip on Serin's jaw tightened. Did you? The answer lived at the back of her tongue, bright and suicidal. Maevra read enough in her face to slap her. Serin staggered sideways into the crates. Her lip split on a splintered corner. Copper taste flooded her mouth, hot and immediate, a bright clean note amid the damp stink of the warehouse. Do you imagine they would be kind? Maevra asked. Her voice remained even. That was the worst part. Do you think men who inspect stonefalls and chain failures would treat you as anything but a tool with skin? Here, at least, you are with family. Family. The word landed like something thrown. Maevra uncoiled the wet rope from her belt. You hum in your sleep, she said. You hum when you carry stock. You hum when you're frightened. It gets into my bones. Makes my skull ring. I have endured it for years. The least you can do is learn control. The rope snapped across Serin's calf. Pain arrived a heartbeat later, sharp and hot. She made no sound. Sound invited interest. Interest prolonged things. Again. Across her shoulder this time. Again, lower. Not enough to maim. Maevra never damaged what she considered useful stock. By the fourth strike the humming in Serin's throat had begun for real, involuntary, a deep involuntary vibration like a trapped instrument answering impact. Maevra's face hardened at once. There, she said. That. The fifth strike missed its intended place because Serin flinched, and it cut across the side of her neck. Maevra swore, not in guilt but in irritation. That was your fault. Of course it was. When it was over, Maevra rewound the rope with brisk efficiency. Serin stayed on one knee, breathing through her teeth. Rainwater dripped from the beam above onto the back of her hand, cool and rhythmic. The lower room tonight, Maevra said. And if I hear that sound again, I'll give you something louder to think about. She walked upstairs without looking back. Serin remained where she was until the lantern flame nearest her guttered. Only then did she rise, gather herself in pieces, and go down to the storage room beneath the warehouse. Calling it a room was generous. It had once been a coal recess. Stone walls. No window. One cot. One blanket. One rusting hook in the ceiling where someone, long ago, had hung scales or perhaps meat. The door bolted from the outside. Maevra had stopped doing that years ago, after discovering that voluntary confinement was cheaper. She no longer needed iron. Habit worked better. Serin sat on the cot and pressed her hand against the wall. The cliff beneath Ilyr's reach was full of voices. Old pilings driven deep into wet stone. Anchor bolts. Drain channels. Root systems from the pines clinging above the village. Tunnels where smelter heat moved like the breath of sleeping beasts. She listened the way other people might pray. Usually the village made one great familiar chord: labor, weather, weight, endurance. Tonight another note ran beneath it. Thin at first. Then clearer. A suspension bridge on the eastern span. One of the long ones over the lower ravine, used for taking ore carts from the terraces to the bell foundry and back. One chain under strain. One link not yet broken but no longer true. Rain hammering it, wind pulling, the whole load-bearing line singing with the metallic misery of something about to fail. Serin's eyes opened in the dark. No one else would hear it. Not until the break. She sat very still. If she told Maevra, Maevra would ask how she knew. If Maevra believed her, she would use it. If Maevra doubted her, she would punish the interruption. And if Serin said nothing and the bridge failed tomorrow under a loaded cart? A memory rose, unwanted, her father laughing with river water in his beard, telling her every structure tells the truth before it dies if you know how to listen. He had worked rigging and bell lines before drink took him apart. He had understood some fragment of what she was, enough to smile at it rather than fear it. He had died under a snapped hoist cable when Serin was 12. After that, Maevra's version of love had become total. Serin stood. The decision did not feel like courage. It felt like pain changing direction. She pulled on dry stockings from beneath the cot, then boots 2 sizes too large because they had once been Maevra's and nothing in the house belonged to Serin unless it had first stopped being useful to someone else. She wrapped a shawl over her shoulders, took the little tin comb their mother had left behind, and tucked a stale heel of bread into her pocket. Above her, the warehouse creaked. Rain. Wind. Distant thunder beyond the sea. She opened the lower door. The lane outside was empty, slick with reflected lamplight. Water rushed down the stairs between buildings in shining sheets. The village climbed above her in stacked darkness and amber squares. Below, the harbor lamps swayed in a storm, blurred to stars by rain. The eastern span lay 3 terraces down and 1 ravine over. Serin did not think about leaving. Not at first. First there was only the chain, its wrongness, the urgency of that note drilling under her skin. She slipped along walls, moved under awnings, crossed the narrow plankway behind the smoked fish sheds, and descended iron stairs that rang under her feet. The storm wrapped everything in sound. Good. Sound covered movement. By the time she reached the ravine overlook, she was soaked through. The bridge hung in the dark like a line drawn by someone with a shaking hand. Lantern cages marked each end. In between, blackness and rain and a pale slash of water far below. An ore cart sat abandoned at the midpoint, one wheel cocked. No drivers. No mules. Just the bridge groaning under weight and weather. Serin knew at once which link was failing. Left side. 6 paces from the eastern anchor. A flaw near the weld, old and half-hidden, worsened by cold and years of stress. Every gust plucked it like a string. Every vibration came back cracked. She should go call someone. There was no time. Serin stepped onto the bridge. It moved under her with the queasy live sway of a thing that wanted to throw her off. Rain needled her face. She gripped the side chain and made herself keep going, one careful step after another. Halfway to the bad link she heard another voice under the chain's misery, the small frantic tick of a frightened mule tied to the far end, hidden by the stalled cart. So that was it. They had lost nerve in the storm, abandoned the load, left the animal. Of course they had. Easy, Serin whispered to no one who could hear. She reached the failing link and crouched. In the lantern glow from the eastern post she could just make out the ragged line where metal had begun to part. No tools. No way to fix. But maybe to ease the strain. The ore cart's load had shifted. If she could release enough weight, enough tension. A lantern flared on the far side. Who's there? The shout nearly made her lose her footing. A figure splashed onto the bridge approach, broad-shouldered in a hooded oilskin. Another behind him with a pole lamp. Workers returning, too late and exactly on time. Stop! Serin shouted. Don't come on. The first man halted. The lamp lifted. Rain silvered everything. What are you doing out there? It's the left chain. 6 paces in. It's going to go. There was a pause in which the storm itself seemed to lean closer. Then a third voice, older, sharper, from behind the workers, moved the lamp higher. The lamp rose. A man stepped forward from the dark beneath the foundry awning, one gloved hand on the rail. Human, Serin saw at once. Compact, gray at the temples, soaked to the shoulders, a leather apron under his cloak. He squinted at the chain, then at Serin, then at the loaded cart. "Can you confirm?" one of the workers shouted over the rain. "Not from here," the man said. "But if she can hear what I think she hears, get off the bridge and cut the mule loose from this side. Now." Nobody moved. The human's voice changed by half a degree. Not louder. Harder. Now. Men obeyed that tone. One darted around the rail post to the tether point on the approach. The mule screamed as he slashed the rope, then bolted away into the rain. "Good. Good. One thing not dying tonight." The human called to Serin. "Can you get to the cart?" "Yes." "Don't try to roll it. Kick the locking wedge from the right wheel. If it drops and swings, the left line might survive the release." Might. Serin didn't ask who he was or why she should trust him. He was the only person in earshot who had not laughed at her warning. She edged to the cart. The bridge dipped sickeningly under the concentrated load. Rain got in her eyes. She wiped them with the back of her hand and found the wedge, jammed hard against the wheel. The chain sang shriller. "Hurry," the human said. Serin drove her heel against the wedge. Once. Twice. The wood shifted but held. The flawed link screamed. Third kick. The wedge shot free. The cart lurched. For one white, endless second the entire bridge became motion. The cart slid sideways, slammed the rail, then tipped. Or spilled out in black chunks, hammering down into the ravine. The cart itself twisted, hung, shrieked, then tore free and dropped. The bridge snapped upward under the lost weight. The bad link split with a sound Serin felt in her ribs. But because the cart was gone, because the angle had changed, because some impossible balance of strain and luck held for one more heartbeat, the rest of the chain did not follow. Serin slammed flat to the wet planks, arms around a rail post, while the bridge bucked like a live thing trying to drown her. "Stay down," the human shouted. She stayed down until movement became swaying, and swaying became the ordinary terrible life of a bridge in storm. When she finally raised her head, the human was already on the span. He moved with care and with familiarity, as if he knew exactly how structures lied when they were dying. One hand slid along the sound side chain, the other carrying a short hammer clipped to his belt. Rain streamed from his hood. He reached her, crouched, and looked first at the broken link, then at her face. "You all right?" It was such an absurd question that Serin nearly laughed. She settled for, "I think so." He peered at the broken chain. "You were right. I know." A corner of his mouth shifted at that. Not amusement exactly. Recognition. Up close she could see that his right hand trembled, slight but constant, even when at rest. He noticed her noticing and turned the hand inward without embarrassment, merely practicality, as if to keep the rain from making it worse. "What's your name?" he asked. "Serin." "I'm Alden." Behind him, the workers were swearing with the relieved aggression of men who had not expected to remain alive. One of them shouted that the Eastern foundry master would skin them all. Another wanted to know what in all drowned hell's a horned girl was doing on the bridge in the middle of a storm. Serin thought suddenly, with the clean terror of clarity, if Maevra hears of this before I am gone, she will never let me out of reach again. Alden seemed to hear something like that in the silence that followed. His gaze moved over her torn shawl, the welt darkening at her throat, the boots too large, the look of someone who had come out into weather with no real plan beyond a way. "Do you have somewhere to be tonight?" he asked quietly. Below them the ravine roared. Serin looked back toward the upper terraces where Maevra's warehouse glowed faintly through rain and distance. Even from here she could imagine her sister discovering the lower room empty. The fury would be precise. Efficient. Endless. "No," Serin said. Alden nodded once. Then come off this bridge before the storm changes its mind. He took her by the forearm, firm and impersonal, and guided her to the foundry side. The Bell foundry sat lower than the smelters, where the cliff widened enough to hold a yard and a long-roofed stone building with vent towers. Serin had heard of it all her life and been inside only once as a child, clinging to her mother's hand while huge bronze throats hung cooling from gantries overhead like captive suns. At night, in storm, it felt like the inside of some sleeping machine. Alden led her through the yard, past stacked sand molds under tarps, past carts of charcoal gone soggy at the edges, and into a side workshop attached to the main hall. Heat met them first, blessed and immediate. Then smells. Coal, beeswax, wet wool, metal scale, tea gone strong in an iron kettle. The room was half forge, half laboratory, half chaos arranged by a person who knew exactly where each piece of chaos belonged. Calipers. Tuning forks. Bell scraps. Lengths of chain. Chisels in numbered racks. Sheets of figures pinned to the wall, annotated in a narrow severe hand. A narrow cot in a corner. One table crowded with sound stones and bronze samples scored with test marks. Serin stopped dead in the doorway. It was the most dangerous place she had ever seen. Not because of the tools. Because of what it suggested, a life built around listening to materials and believing they had something worth saying. Alden shrugged off his soaked cloak. "Sit by the brazier before you start shivering so hard you crack," he said. "I'm fine." "You're blue." "I'm always blue." His face remained solemn for exactly 1 second before betraying him. Serin, against all reason, almost smiled. She sat. He moved around the room with economical familiarity, setting a kettle back over coals, laying out a towel, finding a clean shirt far too large for her from a chest. He did all of it one-handed when the task needed precision. The tremor in the right hand worsened whenever he reached for weight or force. Serin watched. She did not know how not to watch hands. "You knew what to do on the bridge," she said. "I know bridges." He set a mug before her. "And chains. And what rain does to old metal. Drink. What is this?" "Tea. Unless you prefer pneumonia." It smelled real. Not herb water or bark scrapings. Real tea, tannic and bitter and rich enough to make her throat ache. She wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat bite into her skin. Alden pulled up a stool opposite her and sat with a grunt that suggested his back had filed formal complaints years ago and been ignored ever since. "That mark on your neck," he said. "Not from the bridge." Serin's fingers tightened on the mug. He glanced toward the door, not because someone stood there, but because it was wise to account for exits when speaking of dangerous people. "Someone's going to come looking," he said. "My sister." "Older?" "Yes." "Mean?" "Yes." "Resourceful?" Serin looked at him. He sighed. "I take that as a yes." Rain drummed on the workshop roof. Somewhere beyond the wall, something huge in the main foundry shifted with a deep bronze note like thunder trapped in metal. Alden folded his trembling hand over his steady left one. "You don't have to tell me anything tonight," he said. "But if she comes through that door demanding the right to drag you out by the hair, I prefer to know whether I'm offending family affection or interrupting a crime." Serin stared into the tea. Steam blurred her reflection. "She says she protects me," Serin said at last. "And does she?" "She keeps other people from using me." Alden was quiet for a moment. "By using you first." Serin looked up sharply. His expression did not soften. It sharpened in a different way, the way metal does when the dross burns off. "Get changed," he said. "There's a bolt on that inner room. It locks from your side. Sleep there tonight. In the morning, if you still want to leave, I'll point you toward the south road." If you want to stay long enough to dry out and think, you may. If your sister arrives, she can shout at me before breakfast. I'm at my most disagreeable then. He rose, then hesitated. One more question, he said. On the bridge. How did you know the exact link? The old reflex sprang up whole, deny, diminish, call it luck. Then she remembered the chains singing under the rain. Remembered him listening when no one else had. I hear when things are wrong, Serin said. Wood. Rope. Iron. Stone, sometimes. Before they break. Sometimes before they know they're going to. Alden stood very still. Then he turned, crossed to the wall, and took down a small bronze disc from a hook. He struck it lightly with a wooden mallet. The note bloomed, warm and clear. What does that tell you? He asked. Serin closed her eyes. There was a flaw near the edge, shallow but widening from repeated cooling. Not dangerous yet. A weakness in the center where the cast had bubbled and settled. A brighter overtone on the left side where someone had ground too close in correction. She opened her eyes. It will crack from the rim inward after a few more hard strikes, she said. And whoever tuned it last took too much from the left. Alden did not move. Very softly, he said, well. He set the disc down with unusual care. Sleep, he said again, but now the word held amazement under it like fire under ash. That night Serin lay on a narrow bed in the inner room and did not sleep for a very long time. The bolt sat in its socket with a simple honest weight. Hers to move. Not someone else's. Such a small sound when she slid it into place, and yet she felt it ring through her bones. Outside the room, the workshop settled around the storm. Fire hiss. Kettle lid tick. Distant bell metal answering changes in heat with tiny cooling sighs. Alden moving once or twice, then stillness. No footsteps descending on her. No hand at the latch. No pause outside the curtain that meant someone was deciding how much pain to spend. Toward dawn she rose, unbolted the door, and stood at the workshop threshold with her shawl clutched around her. Alden was asleep in a chair by the dying brazier, chin on chest, spectacles crooked, one hand resting over a page of calculations. His right hand trembled even in sleep. Serin could leave now. The south road was real. The storm had broken. Somewhere beyond the headlands and the pine switchbacks were towns where Maevra's name meant nothing. But outside lay only distance and weather and hunger. Inside was danger of a different kind, being seen accurately. She stood there in the gray hour while the village above woke one chain, one shutter, one gutter at a time. Then Alden snorted himself awake, blinked at her, and said, if you're going to haunt the doorway, at least put the kettle on. It was not kindness that made her stay. It was curiosity sharpened into need. By mid-morning the whole eastern quarter knew about the bridge. Serin learned this from the sounds before the words. Markets have their own pitch, barter, gossip, rivalry, boredom. Today there was an extra wire threaded through everything, high and bright with retelling. The girl on the span. The foundry chain. Alden Mar the bellwright taking in strays. Maevra's sister. Maevra's property. Maevra's disgrace. Alden worked as if public opinion were weather. Irritating, inevitable, not worth arguing with directly. He had her sorting bronze ingots by composition within the hour. How? She asked, kneeling by the marked bins. Strike them, he said, handing her a small leather mallet. Lightly. Listen. Serin did. Tin ratios sang differently. Impurities clouded the note. One ingot in the wrong stack sounded sour all through. Alden watched her identify it, then nodded to himself with the grim satisfaction of a theory acquiring bones. What is this place? She asked. A workshop. No. Really. He pushed his spectacles up his nose with his left hand. A side operation attached to the bell foundry. Officially I repair tuning faults, inspect suspension yokes, calculate resonance tolerances, and do all the work people remember they need after something expensive cracks. Unofficially, I spend my nights trying to keep a village from hanging itself over ravines with neglected metal. You're not from here. No. Why stay? He looked at his right hand. When he answered, his voice had gone plain. Because bells don't kill people unless you drop them on purpose, and I've had enough of making things that can. That was all he said then. But it was enough to tell Serin there was a locked room somewhere inside him too. Near noon Maevra arrived. Serin heard her on the yard gravel before anyone else did. Measured, furious, the particular rhythm of boots belonging to someone who intended to leave with either victory or blood. Two of her dock men followed, heavier and uncertain. Men who were brave in groups and careful around employers. Alden did not look up from the tuning frame he was adjusting. "Inner room," he said. Serin did not move. He glanced at her. That wasn't a suggestion made out of fear. It was a strategic recommendation made out of irritation. Decide quickly. The workshop door banged open. Maevra stood framed in cold daylight, rain-washed and immaculate, dark cloak pinned at one shoulder, whip at her hip, hair braided back from her horns in severe black ropes. Her gaze found Serin at once and sharpened to a point. "There you are," she said. No relief. Only possession interrupted. Alden set down his tool. "Good morning." Maevra gave him the glance one gives an inconvenient fence post. "You've housed my sister without permission. She came in hypothermic and warned your village about a chain failure your workers missed. You're welcome. My household arrangements are not your concern." They entered my workshop the moment she did. Maevra stepped inside. The dock men remained outside, wiser than their size suggested. Serin hated how her body reacted. Shoulders drawing inward. Breath going shallow. Hands seeking stillness to avoid provoking motion. A map of old fear laid over the room. Maevra saw it and smiled slightly. "Come along, Serin," she said. "You've caused enough spectacle." Alden leaned one hip against the worktable. "No." The single syllable changed the air. Maevra turned toward him in full now. "No. She's an adult. She stays if she wants. She is my sister. And not a chair." Maevra's eyes flashed. "Be careful, human." "I am being careful," Alden said. "That's why I'm standing between you and the doorframe. You're clearly tempted to bounce her head off." One of the dock men made the tiny involuntary noise of a person watching someone else step onto thin ice. Maevra's anger, when public, rarely looked like rage. It looked like refinement. Like a knife being honed. "You know nothing about us," she said. "True. You don't know what she is." Alden's gaze flicked once toward the bronze disc on the bench, then back. "No," he said, "but I know what you are." The silence after that had edges. Maevra turned to Serin. "Is this what you want? To crouch behind a stranger because you're angry with me? You think he sees a person? He sees a trick. A novelty. Something useful." The words struck because they were plausible. Serin felt them trying to root. Alden did not rush to deny them. He only said, "Possibly. But if I use her gift, I pay for the privilege, say thank you, and don't beat her with rope when she breathes wrong." Low bar, I know. Maevra's hand moved to the whip. Serin heard the leather shift before it left the loop. Heard Alden's stool scrape. Heard the dock men inhale. "Don't," Serin said. It came out low, but the room heard it. Maevra's hand stopped. Serin took one step forward. Her knees felt hollow. her skin felt too tight. But she took it. "I'm not coming back," she said. Maevra stared. There are moments when a whole history cracks along a hidden fault line. You rarely hear the break at the time. You hear only the pressure releasing. "Don't be stupid," Maevra said. "I'm not. You have nowhere. No contract, no standing, no money." "I have ears," Serin said, and to her own surprise the words gained strength as they left her. "And they are mine." Something changed in Maevra's face. Not hurt. Hurt required a softer architecture than she possessed. This was more dangerous, disbelief giving way to contempt. "You think this ends well?" she asked. "You think the village won't talk?" "They already are. They think you're in his bed or his pocket. They think you're mad. They think I failed to keep you from embarrassing us." Serin's voice shook. She used it anyway. "You did fail," she said. The slap came fast. Alden caught Maevra's wrist before it landed. Not gracefully. Not with dominance. Simply with the absolute commitment of a man who had decided one thing would not happen in his workshop. Maevra went very still. So did everyone else. Her gaze dropped to his hand on her wrist, then lifted to his face. "Take your hand off me," she said. Alden did. Maevra looked at Serin one last time, and in that look was every year since childhood rearranged into accusation. "Fed you. Clothed you. Shielded you. Paid for you. Endured you. All of it weaponized, sharpened, offered back as debt. When this place uses you up," she said, "don't come crawling to my door expecting family." She turned and left. The dock men vanished after her like remorse. Only when the yard went quiet did Serin realize she was shaking hard enough to rattle the tools on the bench. Alden waited. "I thought," Serin said faintly, "I thought she'd hit me." "So did I. She still might. Probably. But not that time." He picked up the bronze disc, struck it gently, and listened to its clear imperfect ring. "Congratulations," he said. "You've made the first truly terrible day of your better life." That afternoon he paid her. Actual coin. Small, but real. In her hand. For sorting metal and identifying 3 cracked yolks before they were rehung in the bell hall. Serin stared at the coins as if they might evaporate from embarrassment. Alden was offended on principle by this reaction. "What did you think work was for?" he demanded. "In my experience. Survival. That's not work. That's extortion with bookkeeping." Over the next 8 days a shape formed. Not peace. Something better grounded and less fragile. Serin rose with the furnaces. Took tea too strong and bread too fresh because the foundry wives sent loaves once they heard she had prevented a bridge collapse, and gratitude in Ilyr's reach traveled disguised as practicality. She learned the songs of bronze blends, the difference between a bell meant for harbor fog and one meant for burial rites, the exact note a cooling mold made before the surface tension went wrong. Alden learned to ask better questions. Not, "What's wrong with it?" but "Where does the strain begin?" Not, "When will it break?" but "What would move the force elsewhere?" He did not treat her hearing like prophecy. He treated it like expertise. Precise. Fallible. Worth refining. In return Serin learned the mathematics behind what she felt. Resonance nodes. Harmonics. Load paths. Why some shapes spread pressure and others invited failure. Why bells cracked from bad cooling, bad alloy, bad hanging, or bad tuning, each with a distinct grief. The workrooms changed around them. Not quickly. Villages do not surrender their stories on demand. But whispers shifted. The old women on the upper steps began asking Serin whether a stair rail needed replacing. Carters brought axles for her to listen to. One mason, pretending irritation, asked if the east retaining wall sounded wrong to her. "It does," she said. "It always sounds wrong. This is a different wrong." It was. The wall was shored 2 days later. When a section of outer facing slid in the next rain instead of collapsing during market hours, the mason brought her smoked eels and pretended it was excess stock. Maevra did not vanish. She became weather on the edge of the map. Sometimes Serin would hear her voice in the market square below the foundry, bright and laughing and sharp enough to scrape rust. Once she passed the yard gate and did not look up. Once she sent a boy with a parcel. Serin's old shawl, washed and folded, and nothing else. The gesture was so unlike apology that it disturbed Serin more than a threat would have. Then, 10 days after the bridge, the south bell cracked. Everyone in Ilyr's reach heard it. The south bell hung in the tower above the lower harbor, a massive bronze-throated thing rung in fog, fire, storm surge, and shipwreck. It had rung that morning into sea mist thick as wool. On the fourth strike the note split open. Even from the workshop yard Serin felt the wrongness tear across the village like cloth ripping under strain. Alden went white. "Come on," he said. They reached the tower to find half the quay looking upward and swearing. The bell still hung, but a dark line ran from lip to shoulder, thin and deadly. Not yet fallen, thank every listening god, but ruined. The harbor reeve, a broad woman with arms like net hawsers, met them at the base of the stairs. "Tell me you can mend it," she said. "No," Alden said at once. "Not safely enough to trust over water." "Then cast another." "In a week?" "In 4 days," she snapped. "Storm tide's turning. We need the bell." The reeve looked from Alden to Serin. She was trying not to look desperate and failing in a way that made Serin like her. Alden rubbed at his mouth with his left hand. The right was already trembling harder. "A bell this size needs flawless alloy and perfect cooling," he said. "And the old mold templates were lost in the east fire. We have fragments. Fragments are how people die." The reeve's gaze sharpened on Serin. "They say you hear flaws before they show." Serin hated rumor and loved accuracy and had no idea which this was. "I hear some of them," she said. Alden looked at her. Not to stop her. To measure whether she was stepping toward this because she wanted to or because she did not know she could refuse. Serin thought of the broken bridge. Of the harbor below full of ships from blackwater coasts and river towns, all trusting one warning voice in fog and storm. She thought of Maevra saying usefulness was a cage. She thought of the fact that cages and purpose can look alike from inside until you notice who holds the key. "I'll try," she said. The next 4 days remade the village. Foundries are always dramatic, urgency turns them operatic. Sand was hauled. Clay mixed. Old bell fragments measured. Beeswax patterns laid out and corrected under lamplight. The main casting pit was opened and everyone old enough to lift, carry, stir, brace, or get out of the way was assigned something. Alden drew and redrew the profile until his eyes went red at the edges. Serin listened to molds as they dried, rejecting 2 for hidden voids and 1 for an uneven shoulder that would have split the cooling shell. Men who had once smirked at the odd girl from Maevra's warehouse now waited for her to nod before sealing channels. By the second night her voice was nearly gone from overuse. By the third, Maevra came to watch. Not help. Never that. She stood on the upper catwalk in a black rain cloak while the casting floor blazed below her. Firelight painted her horns gold at the edges. She watched Serin move from mold to crucible to hanging frame, watched Alden defer to her at key moments, watched the village do the same. Serin felt the stare like a hook between the shoulders and kept working. At dawn on the 4th day, the bronze was ready. The pour began. There are sounds that bypass language. Molten metal entering a prepared world is one of them. It roared down the channels with a force older than argument, bright enough to stain vision, hot enough to make the skin on Seran's face pull tight. Men shouted corrections. Women with hooked poles controlled the vent flow. Alden directed from the lip of the pit, voice clipped, exact, merciless. Serin listened. To turbulence. To trapped air. To the mold drinking heat too fast on the north side. To one support beam singing under excess weight. That brace, she shouted. Left rear, 2 turns tighter. Someone obeyed instantly. The mold filled. Then came the worst part, waiting while the world decided whether it had agreed to what you had asked of it. Cooling bells speak in tiny truths. Little pings, ticks, settling notes, shifts of contraction. Serin sat with her palm flat on the casting frame for hours while the village held its breath around her. Alden sat opposite, exhausted beyond speech, his trembling hand wrapped in cloth from overuse. At some point in the afternoon Maevra descended from the catwalk and stood a few yards away. No one welcomed her. No one sent her off. She occupied the edge of the circle like a difficult thought. When the first dangerous note came, Serin felt it before she heard it. A nascent stress line forming near the shoulder. No, she said. Alden was instantly alert. Where? Upper West Quadrant. Cooling too fast. He swore, called for wet wool and heat screens. They adjusted. Waited. The note softened but did not vanish. It's still there, Serin whispered. Alden closed his eyes once. If it opens when we break mold, we've lost it. The whole casting floor seemed to bend inward around that possibility. Maevra spoke then, from behind them. The west vent arch is drawing too much draft. Everyone turned. She did not flinch from their attention. She was staring at the upper stonework, eyes narrowed. In winter we used to bank that side with cast cloth when the syrup vats cooled too fast, she said. Your vent aperture is pulling cold sea air straight down the channel. Alden looked up, followed the line, and muttered something unkind about obvious things hidden by fatigue. Can it be fixed? The reeve demanded. Alden looked to Serin. She listened. The stress was growing, but slowly. Like a crack deciding whether it had the courage. If we warm the west shoulder and slow the draw now, she said, it might settle. Might again. That merciless word. Alden began barking orders. Maevra did not move until a laborer nearly collided with her carrying the cloth screens. Then she stepped aside with offended elegance and stayed. Not in command. Not in comfort. Simply present while the problem she had identified was solved by people who did not trust her. Hours later, when the mold was broken at last, the bell emerged dark and steaming and whole. For a full breath nobody believed it. Then Serin laid both hands against the bronze and listened all the way through. No fatal crack. No hidden void. One minor roughness near the lip that tuning could correct. The deep body note thrummed under her palms like a great patient heart. It's sound, she said. The foundry exploded. Cheering in a bell hall is a strange thing, joy colliding with acoustics until the whole room becomes one great living vibration. People shouted, laughed, slapped soot-blackened shoulders. The reeve kissed Alden hard on the cheek to his profound distress and crushed Serin against a breastplate damp with sweat and fog. Someone began calling for riggers. Someone else was already arguing about hanging height. In the surge and light and noise, Serin looked up and found Maevra watching her. Not smiling. Not proud. Not softened. But stripped, for once, of performance. Their eyes held. Maevra glanced at the bell, then back to Serin. You heard it, she said, almost to herself. Yes. The old answer would have been apology. Explanation. Please don't be angry. Serin waited. Maevra's gaze moved over the foundry floor, The people around Serin, the work, the center of gravity that had shifted without her consent. When she spoke again, her voice was low enough that only Serin heard. "You could have done this for us," she said. There it was. The core of it. Not "I hurt you." Not "I was wrong." Simply, this power should have stayed mine to direct. Serin felt something inside her settle with sudden finality, like a beam finding its seat. "No," she said. "I could only ever do it for me." Maevra's mouth tightened. She looked away first. She left before the bell was raised. At sunset the south bell rang. The new tone rolled over harbor and cliff and rain-washed roofs with such depth that people in the upper terraces came out of their houses just to listen. It was fuller than the old bell, less shrill in fog, steadier in the low note. Safer, Alden would say. Truer, Serin thought. When the sound faded, the village felt larger than it had that morning. That night the foundry wives insisted on a meal. Not a tray or a heel of bread shoved into grateful hands, but a long trestle table in the drying hall under strings of lamps, with stew and dark beer and pickled onions and 6 different people arguing loudly about whether the new bell's overtone was better because of the alloy or because Serin was witch-marked by some old cliff spirit. Probably both, Alden said, and took a hard heel of bread to the shoulder for it. Serin laughed before she could stop herself. The laugh startled her more than anyone else. It came out rusty, underused, then grew when the table turned toward the sound and accepted it like weather, normal and passing and welcome. Later, when the lamps burned low and the hall emptied, Serin stepped outside. Rain had finally thinned to mist. The village gleamed. Water ran down steps and chains and roof edges in silver threads. Beyond the harbor, the sea was a field of hammered dark metal under the moon. Alden came out beside her, carrying 2 mugs. "Tea," he said. "At this hour? I'm too old for triumph and beer in the same evening." She took the mug. For a while they stood in companionable quiet, listening to the village settle around the new bell note still hanging, faint as memory, in the stones. "Why bells?" Serin asked at last. "Really?" Alden rubbed his thumb along the rim of his mug. His right hand shook less tonight, perhaps from exhaustion, perhaps because some long-held tension had finally found release. "I used to make field artillery," he said. "Not by choice at first. Then by skill. Then by reputation. The kind of work powerful men call necessary while standing very far from whatever gets broken by it." The mist moved around them in pale slow veils. "One winter," he said, "we tested a line of guns on a frozen plain. Sound carried strangely in the cold. Every blast came back off the ice. I remember thinking the echoes sounded like cathedral bells, and then hating myself for noticing beauty in a machine designed to tear bodies apart." He smiled without humor. "When I left, I decided if I ever worked in metal again, it would be for warning, gathering, mourning. For something that called people together instead of scattering them." Serin held the tea between her palms and let the thought enter her carefully. "And your hand?" she asked. "Sometimes damage is simple," he said. "An explosion. Nerve loss. Mostly healed wrong. Sometimes it's not. Some tools a body refuses after it understands too much about where they lead." He glanced at her. "And you?" Serin looked out over the village. Somewhere on the upper terraces, beyond sight, Maevra would be in the warehouse office balancing figures, correcting losses, mastering every surface of her own life with furious competence. Serin knew with the dull certainty of blood that the story between them was not over. People like Maevra did not surrender ownership merely because the world failed to agree. But ownership was no longer the same as truth. "I thought for a long time," Serin said slowly, "that being needed was the closest thing to being loved." Alden did not interrupt. "Then I thought escape would feel like freedom. But mostly it felt like cold and terror and not knowing where to put my hands." She looked down at the mug. Now I think maybe freedom isn't a door. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's learning the sound of your own life when no one else is tightening the bolts. Alden's expression went very still. That, he said, is irritatingly well said for someone your age. She smiled into the steam. Below them, in the dark, a cart crossed the repaired eastern bridge. The chains held. Serin could hear the load travel from link to link, clean and honest. No hidden split. No lie. From the lower harbor the new bell rang once, lightly, as the watch changed. The note climbed the cliffside in widening circles. Serin closed her eyes and listened to the whole village answer it, beams, hooks, rails, window latches, bells asleep in their towers, ropes damp from weather, the deep-buried bolts in the foundry floor, all of it part of one immense structure still imperfect, still strained, still vulnerable to weather and negligence and the ordinary foolishness of people, yet standing. Standing. She had once believed brokenness was a verdict. A naming. A room you were put in and told to decorate because you would die there. But cracks were not always endings. Sometimes they were the first place light or sound learned how to pass through. She opened her eyes. What happens now? She asked. Alden sipped his tea, considered the mist, the bells, the cliffside village that had accidentally made room for both of them. Now, he said, we inspect the west retaining wall before it murders anyone. Serin groaned. He nodded into the night, satisfied. Exactly. Your better life continues in the least poetic manner possible. The bell rang again, deep and sure. Serin leaned one shoulder against the foundry wall and laughed, and this time the sound came easily. Far above, somewhere beyond sight, rainwater slipped from Maevra's warehouse roof in silver threads. Somewhere below, the harbor kept breathing. Around her, iron and wood and stone continued telling the truth in all the languages they had. For the first time in her life, no one was trying to make that truth smaller. So she listened. And when the world answered back, she did not lower her head.